Welcome to the Community Climate Hub Fall webinar series. And for those of you joining us for the first time, welcome to the Community Climate Hub Initiative. My name is Roland Sellinger. I'm a research assistant and benchmarking lead at the Climate Reality Project Canada. Through several trainings each year, including in Denver and Seattle earlier this year, and most recently in Pittsburgh, Climate Reality trains leaders to share the urgency and solutions of climate change. We're also helping create community climate hubs throughout the country that will raise the bar on climate action in their cities, while spurring ambition at the provincial and federal levels. This webinar is the second last in our fall series, which you can see on your screen. These webinars are meant to exchange best practices and tools that you can use in your own community to accelerate the transition to a low carbon economy. Sign up for the upcoming webinars or explore the tools available to hubs at climatehub.ca. Feel free to ask questions using the Q&A feature, which we will address after our guest presenter speaks. Today's webinar features Alison Surveyor, Coordination Officer at Future Earth. Alison holds a master's degree in chemical engineering from the École Polytechnique de Montréal. Her thesis investigated alternative fuels for gas turbines in 2020 global electricity generation perspective. Concurrently to her work as Coordination Officer at Future Earth, Alison is a course lecturer at HEC Montréal in Sustainability and Operations Management, and is a member of the Board of Directors of an NGO for nature conservation. At Future Earth, she is in charge of coordination activities among the Global Secretariat and will also develop coordination activities with other elements of Future Earth, such as core projects, governing bodies, and regional centers. Thank you for being with us, Alison.
Thank you very much for the invitation. So I'll just dive in directly with the presentation. Sorry. So quickly, the outline of my presentation is, of course, introducing Future Earth, its mission, and a little bit of its history, and moving into what are the main areas of action of Future Earth with some examples, and a little bit more about our networks and how you can connect with them. So Future Earth actually stems from three former global environmental change research programs. IGBP, which was focused on geosphere-biosphere cycles, Diversitas on biodiversity, and IHTP on social sciences and humanities. And they've fostered global research projects and networks that did cutting edge science for the past 30 years. But there was a sense in 2012 that these platforms should merge together to further break the disciplinary silos in order to be more multidimensional, in order to address complex sustainability challenges in the future. And so that is how Future Earth was born. So just a quick glance at our legacy projects, our global research projects that stemmed from these platforms. So you'll see there's many different topics, such as integrated risk governance, ecosystem change and society, global mountain biodiversity, etc. So Future Earth's mission is really to accelerate transformations to global sustainability through research and innovation. And we do this by three main strategies. The first is really mobilizing capacity and building communities that will collaborate on research and innovation. And when we say build these communities, we mean, of course, communities of researchers that go across disciplinary fields, so natural sciences, but also social sciences, economics, engineering, etc. Doing this with partners of society. So we mean it can be private sector, civil society, decision makers, policy makers, etc. The second way is by facilitating co-designing, translating, and synthesizing research in a useful way so that research can really be taken up by decision makers and make change on the ground. And the third is by fostering cultures and institutions that enable interdisciplinary research and action-oriented research. So a little bit more on that is that right now, there are not a lot of incentives for researchers to work across disciplines and with stakeholders. And so we mean to, this is more of a long-term pathway, but we mean to eventually break a little bit of those challenges and barriers. So one of the main ways that we work is through a loosely connected and coordinated networks that we call knowledge action networks that work on grand themes and grand challenges that will actually do a lot of that mobilization of the community, facilitating, synthesizing research, and fostering these interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary cultures. So these are the main themes. I won't go through all of them, but as you can see, they're grand enough and span wide enough to be very inclusive. So a little bit more about our areas of action. So these are basically just snippets of the work that we're doing. So by building capacity in communities, so what are the different levers that we use? So of course, gathering at conferences. So we hosted the International Conference on Sustainability Science in Sweden this summer. So our next big conference is the Sustainable Development Goals in the Anthropocene Conference. It will be hosted in South Africa. And it really is focused on the African context for the SDGs to strengthen their communities and of practice around science for the SDGs and around their implementation. So we'll gather scientists across disciplines, but also with major institutions such as the African Development Banks and UN agencies, and with civil society, private sector, and other NGOs. So that's one lever. Another is through Science and Innovators Fellowship. We do have a program coming up on the subject of One Health. A third is through accelerators. So in this case, we are starting a decarbonization accelerator for the ITC sector. It's going to start with Intel in Sweden, and hopefully gather a good cluster in Sweden. And then we'll be able to move to other regions such as Silicon Valley, India, and et cetera, to really catalyze global change. And the idea here is really to develop guidelines on how the ITC sector can halve its emission every decade, and how it can actually help other sectors do the same. Another way of building communities of practice is through this city's IPCC conference that's actually being hosted in March 2018 in Edmonton. So Future Earth is one of the main research partners in this partnerships that you can see the logos. So it's very much being developed with important stakeholders, especially at the municipal and city level. So the idea of this workshop is that in the fifth report of the IPCC, there was a real gap in assessing climate change challenges in cities. And so there was a thought that we needed to mobilize for the first time the global community around this issue with stakeholders, and clearly define what are the current research gaps and define an agenda for the next 10 years on the research questions to be developed for them to be finally assessed by the IPCC in report number 7. So on facilitating research and innovation, of course, one of the main levers is to direct funding. So currently there is a lack of funding for inter and transdisciplinary research. So we have some seed grant programs, and we're trying to also go to unconventional funders for research. So in our case here on our Pegasus seed grant program that targeted natural assets, oceans, and food, water, energy nexus, we worked with two foundations, the Gordon and Betty Moore and the Nomis Foundation. And eventually, it's not just this seed program, but eventually it's to build good relationships and really change how philanthropies can also fund research. We also work with the Belmont Forum of National Research Funding Agencies. And the way that we do so is to help them figure out topics for their next international collaborative research calls, scope those topics, scope those questions with researchers and stakeholders, and help catalyze teams, international teams to apply. So here are the topics of the next calls coming up. And Canada through NSERC is actually participating in the next call, which is, well, it's opened already on biodiversity and ecosystem services. So of course, by enabling research, we also mean, promoting and doing the research. And so this is one article that was published last year by our Global Land Program, which was one of the global research projects I mentioned at the beginning of this talk. So this was a publication on how can we feed 9 billion people without further deforestation in 2050, and how can we do this? And so this is the type of research that emanates from those projects. The way we've been working so far on synthesis and translation is a lot with science policy interfaces. So I'll just mention a few here. We are committed to the high-level political forum of the SDGs. We've been very much involved in Habitat 3, in not only pushing for science-based decision-making, but in the framing of the new urban agenda, but also by being in Quito, developing this pavilion in order to help the exchange of researchers and stakeholders, having visualization competitions. We had a book launch. We had stakeholder panelists. So we had the Montreal Town Hall, for instance, talk with an ex-minister in the Americas, and one of the biggest Swedish firm of architecture, for instance. We also do work with the CBD and IPS. So for instance, with IPS, we're in a working group on developing and recommending biodiversity evaluation criterias. So a little bit more about our networks. So this is a global map where Future Earth is active. So in these red dots are our global hubs. So our global hubs is Future Earth staff. That's main purpose and work is to work at the global level. So we're based in Colorado. I'm based in Montreal. There's Sweden, Paris, and Tokyo. We also have regional centers or partners in the Americas, in Africa that's being developed, in the MENA region, and in India and Asia. We as well have national networks of Future Earth. So sorry, just coming back to the regional centers, of course, their role is to bring about the mission of Future Earth at the regional level. As I was saying, we also have about 20 national networks of Future Earth, mainly located in Europe and Asia. And we have our global research projects that I mentioned several times now that are based all over the world. And our knowledge action networks. So how can you connect to our networks? So that's been one of the biggest questions that we've had, and we are working through facilitating that connection. So there's four main ways that we see, especially if you're based in Quebec or Canada. So the first is the open network. The second are knowledge action networks. The third is a visualization tool. And the third is a global research network map. So what do we mean by our open network? So our open network is really for anyone to sign up. It's really to build communities. So anybody can sign up, it's free. And it's really to meet peers and form new research partnerships. You don't only have to be researchers. Of course, when we want to do action-oriented research, these researchers are looking for stakeholders, so it's open to NGOs and other partners. We're also trying to make it a go-to spot, so having all sorts of global opportunities and local opportunities, such as new funding, what are the events that are taking place, etc. You're also welcome to host. You have all the tools to host your own webinars and to stay really up to date on research projects and register for our events and opportunities that come up. So open network is really set up to be a community building tool. Our second is our knowledge action networks, which are these loosely connected networks on these grand challenges that bring together research communities and stakeholder communities. So the main way of getting in touch with these knowledge action networks is through our secretariat. So we can always facilitate that connection. The third is something that's really under development. And if I come back to a little bit our funding scheme, so our Montreal Hub is actually funded by the FRQ and many Quebec universities. And so what we also want to do, although our mandate is global, is to have a local footprint. And so we wish to really highlight the amazing research that's being done in Quebec, and also bring some opportunities to these Quebec researchers. So we're currently prototyping a visualization of sustainability university research in Quebec. So what you'll be, and this will be of course available to all of you on our open network and on our website. So you'll be able to quickly visualize key research centers, chairs, networks, programs in Quebec, and how they relate to specific themes, and connect with these centers. And fourth is, of course, as I mentioned, we have this huge network, and it's in our plan to really have a strong sense of that network, to map it, and to have a strong database so that you can get in touch with researchers in specific fields or on particular topics, or that are situated in a specific region or a nation. So that's to be developed. It's currently we would like to get this done by the first half of next year. So that's something to be further developed. And that's about it. Thank you for your attention, and thank you, Matthew, for this opportunity to present Future Earth. Here you can see the logo of our funders, and I'll let Matthew continue with explaining a little bit more about the Community Hub.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you so much, Alison. Great to have you with us, and really nice to be in a dynamic city where there's so much going on. As you can see, those organizations that are funding Future Earth here in Montreal, all of which are well established and are full of professionals and researchers and people that spend their entire careers focused on sustainability. One of the things that they frequently tell me when I speak with them, because I went out for dinner, for drinks last night with a couple of them, are that they want to see their work being put into practice faster. I mean, I think typically the research that comes out takes sometimes up to 20 years before it is operationalized. And that's where the community climate hubs are seeking to accelerate, that gap. So with that in mind, how do you see groups across Canada, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. I've got a brief presentation about the Climate Hub initiative prior to getting into some questions. So for those of you on the webinar today, please drop your questions into the Q&A section. I will give your questions priority, and then if there's time, I'll get my own curiosity satisfied. I know a number of you did also include questions in the registration form, so we'll be getting to those as well. But yeah, please feel free right now to, in the Q&A section, drop your questions. So what we're trying to do across the country, for those who are not aware, or for those who are joining us for the first time today, is set up climate hubs. We have folks interested, and in some cases, hubs raring and well on their way to being established. In Montreal now, the group that was kind of like the progenitor of this whole initiative is very active, and we're very interested in having anybody in the Montreal region engage. But in any of these other cities, we have groups getting started, and you're welcome to sign up at climatehub.ca in order to get connected to those groups. The objective of the groups, or the principles basically, are act local, driven by citizens, and focusing on diversity. Really important that for politicians to take action, they need to see that a broad spectrum of their constituents are participating. So that you can check out a past webinar about building diverse coalitions if you'd like, also at climatehub.ca. And the objective of the hubs is to really move their city along this 5-step process that's been set out by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, creating emissions inventory, setting a target, developing a plan, funding the plan, which is a sticking point, particularly in Ottawa and Toronto right now. We're really pushing for 2018 budgets to include adequate funding for the plans that were developed, and then monitoring and reporting on progress of those plans. So what are we doing at Climate Reality to help support the work of hubs across the country? Several things. I'm going to relocate myself quickly just in case that background noise is distracting. And so these are some of the tools that we're providing to hubs, and you can find them at climatehub.ca. What we're proposing for each of the hubs to do, starting in January, finishing in March, is a benchmarking process developed largely by the wonderful work of Roland, who will be joining us a little bit later again to conclude the webinar. And we'll be presenting a report comparing those benchmarked cities on Earth Day of next year. So with that, I will open the floor to questions, and we'll jump back to the Q&A box there, as well as the registration questions. So feel free to drop them in there. The first question in the Q&A box is, what is the IPC sector? If you can just give us a quick point of information there.
Oh, yes, it's the information and sorry, it's the information technology and communication sector.
Great, okay, thanks. And a couple of others that came out of the registration process. What's the best, in your experience, have you seen the process of researchers in a city, in a specific place, having an influence directly on their city's policy? Do you see a correlation perhaps between the number of researchers in a city and maybe their propensity to make their opinions known, or their research public, and the progress of a city on its sustainability metrics?
Wow, that's a good question. I can't say that I have data to back that up, so I wouldn't know. But if you're looking at mechanisms that I saw that researchers' work was being used at the local level, I know actually of a project in Montreal called Salon, which was based at the Polytechnique and other universities, and it was actually about heat exchangers at the actually is it neighborhood? Yeah,
neighborhood level.
Yeah, neighborhood, but it's actually at the block level. And they developed this really nice heat exchange system in their alleyways. And that was built with, I mean, there was, of course, developing the process, the technology, but that was built with the community. They had community buy-in. They went into the municipality of Rosemont and actually created that. And I actually know the people that catalyzed this, and they were based at the university, but also based in other different NGOs. So I thought that was a very nice example of mechanism at the grassroots level and making concrete changes.
Cool, thanks for that. Some interest on food security. Can you speak a little bit more about what Future Earth is doing around food security, the water? I mean, I saw a couple of the action groups, water, food, Nexus, sorry, the water, food, something Nexus, and there was another one on sustainable consumption, I think. Can you speak a little bit more about, let's say somebody wants to reach into those networks. What's the first step, and how do they go about reaching a researcher that can maybe help them in those areas?
Yes, absolutely. So first of all, we have a knowledge action network that specifically targets the food, water, energy nexus. It is at the global level right now. They're really identifying case studies and main mechanisms that are being used in different regions to address these issues. The best way to contact them, you can, of course, send me an email, and I will push that email to the coordinator of that specific network. So that's one thing. Another thing is that we'd actually are at the first process of designing a prize at the municipal level for Quebec and potentially Canada on actually food, water, energy, closed loop solutions, but not only at the developing a technology, but making sure that there's economic growth, and urban well-being, and really good local community and municipality buy-in into the projects. So that's eventually something that we wish to launch.
Great. And speaking of, I mean, kind of conversely to the first question that was asked about the correlation between researchers and action in a city, it's not always just the fact that there is knowledge that action happens, but it is people taking that knowledge and saying, we're going to make it happen. And that's really where we want the hubs to kind of come alongside the wonderful research that's being done and to accelerate its implementation. So I've dropped your email address there in the comments in the chat window for those who would like to send a message about connecting. And I think you also projected it earlier in the slides. So for those who are not on the webinar live, but will watch it in en différé after the fact, they'll be able to contact you there. So a couple of more questions, and then we will try to close things up. If you do have a question that is burning, then please enter it now, because otherwise we're going to close up after these last two questions. An anonymous attendee asked, I think a global website organized by country province where any local actions to reduce greenhouse gases could be posted would be useful. It would be a good news site that would motivate other areas, other geographies, other cities and regions to follow suit, especially to copy nearby efforts. Does such a platform exist, and could it be part of your network?
Well, I think that's a very good idea. I think on the open network, it's really built to kind of highlight what's being done. So if you sign in, you'll see that the way that the categories are divided is, of course, through CAN themes, but also through geographies. So our national networks and some other folks actually have like a China section of the open network or whatever. So that could be one way. But I do want to also steer you into something that was developed by Future Earth researchers, which is the seeds of the good Anthropocene. And the project was actually being led by researchers at McGill. And it was actually defining seeds of making change globally. So people submitted their own local projects and how they were trying to catalyze change. And there was, of course, an evaluation process. And the ones that, were evaluated to be able to make significant changes were put into a global map. And so if you type in seeds of the good Anthropocene on the web, you will be able to find that map.
Another wonderful map that exists is it's a Quebec-based map run by the RNCREQ, and that organization, you can Google that, and I'm pretty sure they're the only acronym, at least the only one in Canada. You'll be able to find a map called Par notre propre énergie, or for by our own clean energy. And that map lists a number of inspiring initiatives happening across the province of Quebec. And part of what we're trying to do with this hub campaign as well is to create that kind of network of a map with inspiring initiatives across the country. You can see a beta version of the map on our website, climatehub.ca, in the toolkit section. Quick question from Joey, and I think we answered it by putting your email address there in the chat window, and that being he'd like to connect with the city's decarbonization and transformations knowledge action networks as soon as possible. So he's very excited to get connected. And finally, before we close up with a conclusion from Roland, is there research to support actions in rural areas? Are there any, there's a group that's focused on cities. Is there also a group focused on the kind of high carbon lifestyles that are typical of rural inhabitants? Anything happening on your radar on rural transformations? So
that the rural part, of course, won't necessarily be a target of our urban knowledge action network. However, you can see it through other knowledge action networks, such as the one on sustainable consumption and production. So of course, rural communities are included in that. And through, I forget the other one I wanted to mention, the transformations one, yeah.
Okay, great. So thank you all for joining us. I'll hand it over to Roland to close things off.
Yeah, thank you all for being with us today, especially Allison. We hope you've come a long way with knowledge and inspiration to get in your community, and invite you to sign up to join a hub at climatehub.ca. Our final webinar of this year is on Tuesday, December 12th at 5 p.m. Eastern and Standard. It features Helmi Ansari of Grosh, a business whose exemplary social and environmental performance has earned it the Best for the World status in 2016. You can sign up on the same site, climatehub.ca. Thank you, and see you again next week.
Thank you.